Thank you again, everybody, for joining today on our webinar on culturally responsive instruction in a blended learning environment. My name is Darcy Carlson, and I'm the Director of Education Consultants at Britannica. I will be your moderator for today's session, and I will introduce our wonderful presenters in just a moment. And with that, what I'd like to do now is introduce our presenters. I'll start with Jamie Paris. Jamie is an education consultant and curriculum project manager at Britannica. She's originally from Australia and has lived and worked in 8 countries and traveled to 30. She was a teacher for about 15 years in Australia, South Korea, Malaysia, the Philippines, Myanmar, the Bahamas, and the United States. And Jamie has worked on government contracts in the U.S. Navy, the Malaysian Ministry of Education, and the Taiwanese public prisons in the fields of curriculum development and teacher training. She recently coached teachers and leaders across New York and New Orleans, and she is the lead facilitator for our culturally responsive cohort here at Britannica. And you'll be hearing about that throughout the session today. We also have Dr. Ahmet Bayezidoglu, and he resides in Princeton, New Jersey. He's originally from Turkey, and he is an English teacher and occasional constitutional law instructor at the Hun School of Princeton. He is a former academic and attorney, and he feels his international litigation experience turns out to be a great preparation for 9th grade English classroom. In addition to 9th grade English, he offers 12th grade seminars on such topics as literature and the law and global literature. And then outside the classroom, he coaches JV basketball, advises on affinity groups such as Middle Eastern Society and Junior State of America, and is active in the Faculty Cultural Competency Committee. And then Dara Martin is an English teacher and co-director of Next Term. She's also a dorm parent at the Hun School of Princeton and New Jersey. She has 20 years of experience teaching both in public schools and in independent schools, and has taught all grades, but is currently teaching 10th and 12th grade English in literature and literature ethics and social change. She is currently a member of the executive board of the Faculty of Cultural Competency Committee, and that's a faculty group that leads and develops school-wide and faculty workshops pertaining to social justice. Now, before getting started and turning this over to Jamie, I'd like to go through just a couple of community guidelines. This is for the chat, of course, and this is that the first one is just please model empathy. We are all coming from different entry points about this topic. We are all experts in our own experience, so focus your time here on your own growth and learning. And we're all learning, so it is okay not to know everything today. And be open to new ideas and listen, both to the presenters and also to those attendees in the chat. And keep your comments and questions focused on the topic at hand with the idea of growth and new knowledge. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Jamie. So Jamie, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Darcy. Okay, so hello and welcome, everybody. I'm truly excited to be here with you all. So as you probably gathered earlier from my bio that Darcy shared, I absolutely love to travel and explore the world. And I especially have a passion for learning and understanding cultures and empowering not only children and youth, but also teachers and anyone in the education field. And my number one goal is that you not only enjoy this short journey and this short time that we have together, but I really hope that we cultivate a new mindset and start to collect a few strategies and ideas to carry back into your schools and into your lives. And many things that I do in this session have actually been created very intentionally and have some purpose and meaning. So just look out for the strategies and ideas that you could actually use with your students. And hopefully there's some really effective strategies that you could use immediately. And I have also made sure that we could use them in a blended learning environment. So that's whether it's face-to-face or remote. And I will say just some advance notice, I am from Australia, as you know, so if my words are a little different, like, how did she say that? I'll blame it on my Australian accent. So to get started, I'm really excited to have a fun activity just to keep us engaged. On the right-hand side, you'll see 3 images labeled 1, 2, and 3. And I just want you to pop in the chat box which number best aligns with how you feel. So I'll give you a moment to pop that into the chat box, and then Darcy can share what we are seeing.
We're seeing a lot of 3s and 2s, a couple of 1s sprinkled in there.
Nice.
We're all over the board here, but a lot of 3s and 2s. We got a 4 in there. I'm not sure what that means, but
1, 2, or 3. It changes for me daily. Well, when I was a teacher, it would often be, I would say, probably number 3, and then there would be those 2 days where I'd just be like, woosah. So it does change from day to day. Okay, great. So as you could see, we're all coming in with different feelings. We're at different points. And that's something that we need to keep in mind with our students when they enter into our classroom, whether that be virtual or in person. So we just need to be mindful of how they're feeling, as well as us, right? It's important to have a mood meter or a check-in. And another thing that I have on the slide for you is this Bitly. So there is a link for you that you can use, and it's an interactive Jamboard. So some of you are probably familiar with Jamboard. Students can actually write their name in the little green boxes, and or not, they can be anonymous, and they can move that box into the appropriate column where they feel that, you know, they're best aligned to with their feelings. So that's just something that you could use across multiple grade levels. Okay, so thank you for participating in that. So now we're going to do another engaging type of activity. I'd like for you to rate your level of awareness of cultural responsive practices. So here what we're trying to do is elicit any prior and current knowledge, which is a very important culturally responsive practice to keep in mind with students. So you'll see on the scale of 0 to 3, yeah, so we have 0. This is where you feel you absolutely have no knowledge. What are you talking about, Jamie? Number 1 is the limited knowledge. I read a book. Now what? Number 2, a good amount of knowledge. I am moving to action. Or perhaps you feel you're at a 3. You have a thorough understanding and knowledge. I use CRT in my daily practices. So we'll begin this poll, and it is anonymous, so your name won't be mentioned. So it's a good gauge to see where people are at. And don't forget, this is a learning journey for us all. So it doesn't matter what level we're at. We're all coming in at different levels. So we'll just give you maybe another 5 seconds to fill out that poll before we close the poll.
We had mostly in the number 2, a good amount of knowledge. There was also quite a bit of number 1s, limited knowledge, and a few sprinkled in with 0 and 3.
Excellent. So as you can see, we are all coming from a different place, and that's totally okay. And you're not alone. Okay. So that's just, again, that's another fun way or an engaging way to get our students to spark their knowledge, to spark their knowledge, but to also engage them in the topic as well. And it gets them to really feel like they're not alone in their learning journey. So session outcomes. What do I hope that you all achieve from today's session? So there are 4 things that I really hope that you walk away with. So the first thing is, I really want you to feel empowered with knowing what a welcoming and affirming and inclusive classroom environment looks like. The second thing is to be able to identify the culturally responsive elements and integrate them into your teaching practice, or actually just beginning to do that. The third thing is just identify some key strategies and ideas that you could use immediately in your classroom. And the fourth outcome is that you can have just a stronger cultural connection with your students. And that's extremely key in building a culturally responsive pedagogy. We really need to focus on building those relationships. So just a quick overview of what we'll be talking about in this session. The first thing, I call them the 4 pillars. The first one is defining cultural responsiveness. Then we'll look at the positive outcomes of cultural responsive practices. And thirdly, this is where we'll spend a lot of our time. Most of our time will be spent in this green pillar. So looking at the effective strategies that can help support your culturally responsive pedagogy. And I'm really excited for the fourth pillar. We have two guests, two teachers that will share their personal story and how they've actually engaged students through culturally responsive practices. So before diving into this session, I would really like to first acknowledge all of you, no matter what your role is in education, whether you're an administrator, teacher, librarian, whoever you are, this is for you. And I understand that it's a challenging time for all of us. So the fact that you're here, being flexible, vulnerable, and growth-minded, I'm really excited that you're here. And most of the people in education, especially teachers, are actually teaching in a hybrid environment. So, it brings with it many challenges. So I really thank you for your commitment to walk this journey. Having been a teacher myself for 15 years, I understand how much struggle it can bring to the table on top of all the other hats that we wear as teachers. So thank you for being here. And I do want you to keep in mind that this is a journey and a process. It's not a checklist like, okay, I have 5 ingredients and that's it. It is a process and a journey. And it takes some of us weeks, months, years, but whatever it is, it is ongoing. And to make it sustainable, we need to just keep that in mind. So let's take a look at what's going on around the globe. So I found some great images which depict what's going on in places such as Wuhan, China. And you see in Thailand as well, they're very enclosed, in enclosed spaces right there. Hong Kong, very spaced out in an outdoor setting. And then you have in England. So I just thought I'd provide some ways to show that you're not alone. There is definitely places all around the world that are doing things differently. And I saw in the chat box very briefly, we have some people in the Philippines and Asia, so maybe you can identify with this. But no matter where you are, no matter if you're in a hybrid learning environment, in person, online, whatever it is, we are here together. So let's journey on. Okay, so I have another activity for you. Some of you may have heard of Menti. I absolutely love it. And if you haven't, I recommend that you use this and make it part of your blended learning environment. It's just so engaging. I had fun creating it, so I can only imagine how much fun the students will have. So I'm going to model this first online practice called word cloud. So obviously you know what a word cloud is. So you can use this practice with your students. And what I'll do is I'm going to, in a moment, share a Menti word cloud. You'll have the QR code there on the corner, so you could scan that with your phone, or you could enter the code there on the bottom right corner into menti.com. And I want you to choose 3 words that you think, what you think culturally responsive means. So go ahead. So as you could see on my screen, you can see the words populating. I just love it. I love seeing the words populate in different colors. And for those of you who are not familiar with Menti, the most popular responses are typically the larger words, so the largest font. So we could start to see that diversity, inclusive, and understanding are quite large, which means a lot of you are writing that in your response. So that's really good. So you can see it's still populating. It's so exciting to see it evolve. Okay, so I will let that continue running. So as you could see, we're all coming from different backgrounds. There are so many different words. And just looking at the words, I don't have time, obviously, to go through every single one, or the eyesight to do it. They're so microscopic, some of them. But honestly, a lot of what I'm saying is a lot of what I'll be touching on. Multicultural, equity. You can see words like engaged in other cultures, willing to learn, safe, rigor, differentiation. These are all of the words that I will either speak in this session or that are part of building a culturally responsive pedagogy. So that's excellent. Okay. So let us move along. So now that we've establish what we think it means, let's actually dive in and look at what culturally responsive teaching and what a culturally responsive classroom actually is. So I will say, before I dive into this, much of my research has come from my own personal experiences in teaching and coaching. It's also come from my own culture, growing up in Australia, having immigrant parents from Greece and Malta. And a lot of it has also come from much research that I've gathered from pioneers and leading scholars, in particular, Zaretta Hammond and James A. Banks. Amazing people to read on if you want to continue your search on, building a culturally responsive classroom. And like you all, I'm on a continuous learning journey and I'm growing continuously. I think everybody in education agrees that learning never stops. We're continuously learning. I mean, have a look at now where we're having to know edtech tools and just become, better at facilitating virtual classrooms. So as you could see along the top, I have 4 terms: culturally responsive teaching, multicultural education, culturally responsive pedagogy, and culturally responsive instruction. Now, 3 of these are interchangeable, 1 is not. I wonder if you can guess which one is not. So you probably guessed it, multicultural education. Now that is something different to the other 3. And I will say that James A. Bank is amazing. He's a pioneer in multicultural education. So I highly recommend you read up on him. He has spoken a lot about multicultural education. And Zaretta Hammond, I will just show you, this is the book here. Fantastic book. It's called Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain. And I highly recommend you read that if you want to delve deeper into this topic. And Zaretta Hammond does a really good job at distinguishing between multicultural education, social justice education, and culturally responsive teaching. They are different. But culturally responsive teaching does have a heavy focus on equity. So she does a really good job at distinguishing between those 3 in equity. And another term you may have heard of, which is not the same as culturally responsive teaching, is culturally relevant pedagogy. So that term was introduced by Gloria Ladson Billings. Again, I think you should look into her if you're interested in reading more about that. And again, that is not interchangeable. It's not the same as culturally responsive teaching. So having said that, culturally responsive teaching is a rich, intentional approach woven into every aspect of teaching. And it is important. You see on the left-hand side here, we have the definition of culture. We as educators need to first be aware and understand what culture actually means. And we really need to understand what culture looks like in our classroom. And we need to focus on knowing what our purpose is as being a culturally responsive teacher. So moving along, I will say that, before I forget, I can't believe I forgot this. One of the most important things I wanted to say about that: culturally responsive teaching is not a strategy. It's not a program. It's not a quick fix. It's not a single lesson. As Zaretta Hammond mentions, it's a mindset and it's a way of thinking about organizing your instruction. And, from a lot of the research that I've done, it does talk a lot about critical thinking skills, rigor, and it also aligns very closely to the DOK levels 3 and 4 and those higher levels on Bloom's taxonomy, where students are encouraged to evaluate, create, and analyze. And lastly, I will say CRT, culturally responsive teaching, focuses on rigor and accelerating student learning. So thank you for listening. That was a big part that I had to share. So having said that, now that we've defined CRT, let's take a look at defining what a culturally responsive classroom looks like. And it goes beyond the classroom wall. So let's look at the pillar of positive outcomes. What are the positive outcomes of culturally responsive practices? So I've outlined them here. So there are many, but there are 4 main ones that I'd like to just cover. And this is the whole reason why we're even having this session. It's to help cultivate those positive outcomes for students and in turn, our educators and school as a whole. So we're looking at things like increasing student engagement, academic growth. A lot of literature confirms this. The third one, supporting children with challenging behaviors. And the fourth, improve student-teacher-peer relationship and connection. Again, another big piece of culturally responsive teaching. And I really love this quote and how it validates these benefits. Only when a child feels valued for who they are as an individual can they fully open themselves up to trust and connection with caregivers, and connection is everything. Okay. So now let's get into some of the goodies. So the effective strategies for creating a culturally responsive pedagogy. So before I dive deep into those strategies, this is the foundation to everything. So with much research and collaboration, I've developed these 9 competencies, which will serve as the foundation for creating your culturally responsive classroom and your pedagogy. And I'll navigate you through a few of these so you can begin implementing them into your curriculum and into your teaching practices. So again, we're only touching on a few of these today, and this takes months, years, like it's a continuous journey. So don't feel like you have to get it all in one day. All right, so let's begin revisiting our curriculum. Okay, so you may ask, where do I even begin, right? Because it is a very rich, rigorous area. So you're looking at your curriculum, but this time you're looking with different lens. And that's what we're doing when we're looking at CRT, culturally responsive teaching. We're considering a different perspective. So this stage requires us asking key guiding questions while using those competencies that I shared with you on the bottom right corner. So we're looking at identifying any gaps. We're measuring the climate and process of our curriculum. We're identifying voices and perspectives that may be present or may not be present in our curriculum. And also identifying any implicit biases that you may be unaware of. We all have them. And it may be influencing how you teach. So I want to point out that throughout each of the following activities and strategies, some competencies will naturally bleed into each other. Okay, so let's look at this. So before we can even really dive deep into curriculum, we need to consider what I call the invisible factors. So they are the things like our implicit biases and our racial literacy skills. So we need to seek opportunities to practice and develop racial literacy with our peers and with our students. So as I mentioned earlier, it does take courage and vulnerability and a growth mindset to start to reflect on our own racial literacy skills and our implicit biases and even our current knowledge about cultures and current teaching practices. So some of you may have heard of implicit association tests or IATs. They can tap into hidden or automatic stereotypes and prejudices that circumvent conscious control. So there's a resource that I strongly recommend that can help you in this area. I recommend you use Project Implicit. It is fantastic. It was a collaborative research effort where researchers from Harvard University, the University of Virginia, and the University of Washington came together and created dozens of tests. And I've provided some samples with you on the slide. That's just like a third of them, but you can see they look at things such as race, religion, gender. There's just so much there. So it's a really good way to uncover those hidden biases and ask ourselves, where do they come from? How do they influence our actions? And what can we do about them? Because they may be influencing your teaching. And I'll just leave you with one last challenging question to take a moment to ask yourself outside of this session. Are you aware of your implicit biases? I know I wasn't until I took that test. Okay, so let's move along with the next topic, creating a welcoming, affirming, and inclusive environment. So how do we do that? So I'd like to look at what it looks like, what it sounds like, and what it feels like. So we need to look at defining what a welcoming, affirming, and inclusive environment is. And some federal data that I found, it illustrated that around 80% of the teaching population is white. And so when I looked at that, I thought, okay, so what does that mean? And our student population is heavily diversified with communities such as Latino, Blacks, Asians, Islanders, and more. So this presents problems such as lack of exposure and lack of cultural understanding for many. So we need to hone into that and ask ourselves, what can we do? How do we move forward? And so I've already provided some strategies, but we're going to look at some more. So this is an engaging activity to make you think back in time. So this is a silent activity. Just quickly, I'm going to give you maybe around 20 seconds. I want you to reflect back in time on the climate and culture of one of your favorite classes or teacher. And I'm sure you can think of a specific teacher. I know I can. And I want you to just envision, close your eyes if you have to, leave them open, it's up to you. How does it look? How does it feel? How do you feel? And what does it sound like? You can write in the chat box if you'd like as well. So I'll just give you a few seconds to reflect. Okay, so thank you for doing that. So now that you've gone back in time, I want you to position yourself in the present time. Now I want you to imagine an outsider looking into your classroom. How does it look? How does it feel? And what does it sound like? Is your classroom welcoming, warm, and affirming? Are students happy? Are they engaged? Are the walls, whether they're virtual or physical walls, are they filled with color, excitement, engaging resources? Or does it look or feel cold? Do students appear tired or disengaged? Can you see students having conversations or reflecting on responses that require thinking outside the box? I recently heard Ken Shelton saying his culturally responsive seminar, brave space versus safe space. So this is what we need to focus on, not only creating that safe space, but one of trust where students feel brave enough and confident enough to share their ideas and perspectives. So just some questions to think about. I mean, on the bottom, I've provided some, but I really challenge you to ask yourself, does my classroom and do my lessons reflect my student body? And how does my class environment reflect who my students are? And how can I foster collaboration among my students? Okay, so here are some great ideas that you can use to better know your students and explore their backgrounds, because a lot of us have very diverse classrooms. So worksheets, and I'm sure you've heard of these that I've mentioned there, like Pinterest, TES. Activities such as My Fullest Name. I really love this one because this is where students actually tell a story about their name. And when I learned that my name and its spelling in French means love, I was excited to share that with my peers each time, because as a young girl growing up, I actually was teased for having a male's name, and especially also the Spanish culture, the way you pronounce that is Jaime, which is a male's name. So I always used to get told like, oh, you have a boy's name. And I was so embarrassed and I felt so excluded. But when I found out the meaning of it and that my mother gave me the bionic woman name back in the time, I'm like, oh goodness. But I just got to explore the history, and it just made me prouder of my identity. And so now I'm proud to have a name like Jamie. So the Rice book. This, I'm going to get to this in a moment. This is very, it's closely related to it is related to the activity we provided in the beginning. So this book, it is a fantastic book in celebrating diverse cultures, and it takes children along a journey inside different families' homes, some of which include Haitian, Vietnamese, Italian, and it goes through the journey of how they cook rice differently and accompany their rice dishes with unique spices and flavors. And there's also a great read aloud version that I found on YouTube. So you can just look it up on YouTube. So why did we have this activity? Some of you may have come a little later into the session, but Darcy posed a question to everyone at the beginning of the session. How does your family or culture cook rice? So I looked very briefly and I saw some interesting answers. Some used tomatoes, Spanish rice. Some even used milk. Filipino rice, which I'm familiar with when I lived over there, fried rice, microwave rice. So there was a whole array of ways to cook rice. And the reason why we use that activity in the beginning is because it's something you can use as an icebreaker at the start of the school year with your students. It's a great icebreaker activity, and I hope you had fun doing it. And the other thing is, rice is such a familiar ingredient across the globe in many cultures, as you can see. And almost every student has something to say and share their experience. So it provides varying perspectives, and students get to learn from one another about their perspectives, their experiences, and their cultures. And this is also very useful for us when we're developing our curriculum. And there's also some ways that we can link this to younger children. So we could also, not just younger children, it's children across all levels, but we could use like, how did you cook chicken? Or how do you cook chicken? How does your family cook chicken? When does someone become an adult is another good question. And for those in music, teachers could ask, how are drums used in your family and culture? All of these questions lead to great discussions that reinforce the idea that our ideas, our answers, our experiences are dependent on our background. And just one last thing I wanted to share, just have a look at the types of books you're reading and select books that students enjoy reading. Select topics that get them excited and build your lesson around those. Okay. So let's look at re-evaluating our curriculum. So this is what I like to call the critical consciousness stage. So it's asking the hard questions. So the second step is building upon the first step of revisiting our curriculum. So this is where we're probing a little further. So now that you've explored your self-awareness and you know where you're at and you know the condition of your curriculum, you can move into the step of rethinking and evaluating the elements in your curriculum and ask yourself questions such as these, like, what gaps are there in my curriculum? What voices and perspectives are missing? What areas do I feel need the most attention? So in this stage, you may identify gaps, such as the ones I've provided in the bubbles. Like maybe there's absence of student autonomy, or maybe I don't encourage students to challenge power and privilege, or perhaps I offer limited voices in my curriculum. So this can be applied in science. And I want to use the example of science. So when teachers ask, but how could I incorporate that into science or math? So it can be applied in science. So imagine I'm introducing you to the concept of hybrids and agricultural methods. And as a teacher, I might predominantly look at the white dominant culture or European influence with limited focus and exploration of how Native Americans contributed to science, but who also developed a wide variety of foods by selective breeding and probably hybridization prior to European settlement. We don't want to just focus on the famous mainstream scientists or simply use an add-in approach, the history of Native Americans and how they helped with the hybridization of corn. We need to consider using authors that represent diverse backgrounds and speak through different lenses, offering different perspectives. So this step, as well as the following that we're about to look at, is where you'll spend a lot of your time really diving into your curriculum and adjusting that. And just remember, we're not just teaching the bare minimum. We have to take a more novel and deeper approach if we want to be culturally responsive. So revising your curriculum. So this is where the hard work takes place. Now we need to revise our curriculum. So now that we've identified some of the gaps, this is where we really dive in and start to create and implement the things that we examined and reevaluated in steps 1 and 2. So this is what I like to call the hard reset, especially after COVID. It reminded me of like buying a new phone. Everything gets wiped out, the pictures, the contacts are gone, and you get a phone that resets to the original factory settings. So we need to reset our thinking, do things differently, but we still have access to our cloud storage to pull some of our foundational teaching and learning practices into. So keeping those culturally responsive competencies that I showed you in the circle, the 9, that can be your guide to help you ask questions such as, what do I need to fill in the gaps? What elements will I include in my curriculum while using a culturally responsive lens? So this is where we get to the fun part. So as we saw earlier in the science sample lesson I shared with you, that used an additive approach with the Native Americans and, the white dominant culture and the Albert Einstein scientists. So this is where we have to consider the exploratory process of reevaluating and revising our curriculum, so we don't just add that additive approach and sprinkle in other cultures and achievements. So this is where the key is, we want to offer our students a transformative lens where they start to think critically and deeply, touching on those higher order level thinking skills. And we want them to be curious learners and to question things and to learn how to inquire about the unknown. And you see that I've provided some images on the bottom just to share with you that we can celebrate the contributions of diverse people. Females such as Marie Curie, who was Polish born, she was a French physicist and chemist, or a Black scientist, Dr. Charles Drew, who was a brilliant pioneering doctor who developed new methods for storing blood for transfusions, and he created the first blood bank. And most recently, I discovered some current events, another competency we can infuse. We can look at sharing diverse perspectives and cultures and looking at how those people have come up with amazing discoveries and contributions. Thank heavens for innovators like Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, who is an African-American female and one of National Institutes of Health's leading scientists behind the COVID-19 vaccine. And also I discovered the scientists, hopefully I pronounce this right, Ahmed, Uğur Şahin and Özlem Türeci. So they are husband and wife, Turkish Germans, and their parents were immigrants from Turkey to West Germany, and they actually together co-founded the German company BioNTech, or BioNTech as they pronounce, that partnered with the American company Pfizer to found the COVID vaccine. So as you could see, you can share stories like these with your students as it couples those cross-cultural experiences. It includes things like immigration journey, the struggle, discrimination, as well as great opportunity, and the quest to use a novel scientific method to defeat COVID. So it inspires students and it encourages them to reflect deeply, and it also celebrates diversity, current events, and real issues. So now we need to look at re-implementing our curriculum. So what curriculum approach are you using? This is absolutely amazing. I love this. I wish I had more time to speak about this. It's a whole nother session in itself. Dr. James A. Banks, he proposed 4 different approaches that we can use. And so I'll briefly go through them. Contributions or heroes and holidays approach. So that's when we do things like we celebrate MLK Day or the recent Chinese Lunar New Year. The additive approach, like I mentioned earlier, sprinkles in little additions into our curriculum, such as the contributions of a cultural group like Native Americans, but our main focus still revolves around the dominant cultures. Third approach, transformative approach, and this is where we're really striving to get our students, especially in the culturally responsive instruction. This is where we prepare students to think critically and use those higher order thinking skills and equip them with the tools to be able to think critically. And the fourth one is the decision making and social action approach. This is where, like, top of the range, this is where we get students to the point of saying, okay, we want them to be active citizens and agents of change and take part in bringing out change and inspire them to want to take action and think about the steps that they can take to bring about social change. And this is where we want to move our students. We want to move them from the 1 and 2 and take them to the 3 and 4, that transformative decision-making levels. And so I wanted to provide an example here about how Britannica has provided diverse content. So we have something that's phenomenal. It's called Launch Packs. And what it does is it provides that rigorous learning in a culturally responsive way and uses that transformative approach. So it's phenomenal. And you can use so many different resources, but this one in particular, we have, for example, 4,000 science and social studies content sets. We also have 20 African American experience bundles, and a lot of the packs, if not all of them, involve student choice and diverse content. And you can adjust the reading levels. So in culturally responsive instruction, we need to differentiate that content and be able to have different levels for different reading levels. We have translation feature to make sure that we cater to people of different cultural backgrounds who don't speak English. So there's over 80 languages. We provide diverse resources such as informational text, primary resources, and a read aloud feature. So this is just an example of one resource you could use. And I wanted to quickly go through this. You could see from the launch packs, I took this image, and you could use images. I love images. You could use a see, think, wonder strategy, and you can really help students to explore, challenge, and think deeply. And that draws on students' cultural experiences. As you could see on the left-hand side, that's competency 4. And it also looks at, you can use questions and ask students like, do you see yourself in this picture? How? So you can ask those challenging and probing questions. Using culturally rich materials, super important. Are you using materials that are rich, culturally rich? Do you use resources that really elicit the interest of your students, like pop culture, comic books, anime, virtual field trips? We want to be inclusive, and we want to find that way to connect with students and engage them. One thing that I did with my students was take them on a journey to Asia. I showed them one of my videos, and if I was still teaching, I would take them to Egypt, where I was actually on a camel. I struggled on a camel through the Sahara Desert, looking at some amazing monumental pyramids. So again, you can infuse that into your curriculum. Real world issues and current events, a must. National Geographic, New York Times have some great articles on real events, and this is where they came from. And that's something that we can really infuse into our curriculum and help encourage students to really share their voice through discussion, debate, and they can be part of the solution as well, going back to that social justice high-level approach as well. And the last one, student voice, very important. We want to celebrate student voice. You can use voice boxes, multimedia images, my favorite spoken word, as you could see on the slide there. I've provided 3 diverse spoken word videos. And what I'd like to do is just share a sample and a video called Oreo by Anaya Taylor. And I want to share this with you to see the impact of providing the opportunity for student voice and autonomy. So just a quick background. We asked high school students, what's your story? How is your identity shaped by the stories you tell about yourself through media? And one of our students, Anaya Taylor, she shared her experience of being biracial using Lumilabs, one of our video products. So let's watch this video and see what Anaya Taylor produced. It's phenomenal.
You call me an Oreo, and since then I've been inclined to believe so. My white thought and brown skin confused your small minds, and maybe I am an Oreo. Funny how we eat the white icing and leave the black cookies. They grow stale, bitter, and crack. How you take my white brain, my white speech, my white delicacy, and leave my black shell of a body, and I grow stale. I feel bitter, and now I'm about to snap. You call me an Oreo, and so now I call you ignorant. You call me an Oreo, and I paint myself educated. I paint myself beautiful. You call me an Oreo, and I paint myself powerful. And if that's what you depict when you call me an Oreo, then maybe I am one.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So, as you can see, the videos are an amazing way to include students in their own learning and is one way to promote and amplify student voice. And it's a channel for students to share their identity, their culture, and personal experience. And last but not least, workrooms. If you're using Zoom or another virtual platform, amazing way. If you have like Zoom breakout rooms, you can create 4 different rooms that give students a choice to join if they want to talk with the teacher, or if they want to have, talking with their peers, but not with the teacher necessarily. They could have a quiet group room, and they could be in a room on their own, complete quiet. So giving them that autonomy. So without further ado, I'm really excited to welcome Ahmed and Dara. So we're going to begin with Ahmed's journey, personal journey of teaching through a culturally responsive lens. So thank you, Ahmed, and welcome.
Thank you, Jamie. I hope you can hear me okay. Thanks for inviting us, me and my friend and colleague, Dara. This is the end of a long day, I'm sure, for many of our colleagues in the audience. So I can imagine it's getting difficult to focus. So I will try to speak kind of relatively briefly about my experience. Jamie asked us to kind of reflect on what we learned from our participation in the culturally responsive instruction sessions. And I was thinking about that. I suppose these are issues that that all of us have been thinking about for a while now. Neither Dara nor I are newcomers to kind of reflecting at various levels on these issues. CRI for me really allowed a certain kind of conceptualization of these issues. Made me think especially about, the notion that there are different kinds of learners, to pay attention to the unique needs and capabilities of each student, really. And also I felt engaging, participating in the sessions also allowed me to have conversations with my colleagues here at the Hun School of Princeton, which is in some respects the most useful, most pragmatic aspect of this. I also, kind of again rehearsed facing my own limitations as a person and educator. I tend to be something of a kind of analytical thinker, more of a cerebral learner myself. So kind of figuring out how I would translate my personality to that of an effective teacher within this context. That was very, very useful. At the end of the day, to put it very simply, CRI also means to me kind of what good teaching should be about. So sometimes we talk about these issues as if, cultural responsiveness would be something that you sprinkle on top of the kind of real education that you're kind of delivering in the classroom. And this is nice to have, it's extra, et cetera, et cetera. The more I think about these issues, the more I'm aware that, this is good teaching. Being culturally responsive, paying attention to these issues is good teaching. I was reading about a family in Utah apparently asking that their kids be kept out of the African American History Month events in their of all schools, Montessori school. That is the kind of mindset that I have in mind when I talk about this, that what we're doing by trying to be more expansive, culturally responsive, is being good teachers, period. It's not being nice, adding a little bit on top of, the real work of teaching. So those are the things that occurred to me, Jamie, as I was going back and thinking about our conversations and conversations that came out of our conversations with you. I was also happy, Jamie, that you mentioned Uğur Şahin, this Turkish-German scientist who's the founder of BioNTech. One detail in his background is he immigrated to Germany at a very, very young age. And at a very young age, in fact, in elementary school, he was going to be put on a track that would have foreclosed academic routes for him. And one of, apparently, their German neighbors intervened with the school to say there was no way to judge the capability of this immigrant kid who spoke German falteringly at that point, that it would be the wrong thing to kind of put him on a kind of more vocational track. And I suppose whoever that German neighbor was did quite a bit for possibly all of us, given how well Uğur Şahin turned out. Jamie, as you suggested, I kind of thought about a few different lessons. I should say 9th grade and seniors. Those are my audiences. So whatever I say, you already know this, whatever I say needs to be translated to the level, age, etc., the context. So I will talk about certain issues, but I also know that if you're looking at this and trying to think about it from your kind of middle school context, that is going to require different approaches. One of the texts that we read in 9th grade is Richard Wright's Black Boy, a book that I love very much because I find it, quite complicated, not easy to read, etc. So I was thinking about how I approach one crucial, pivotal moment in the text. So in Black Boy, Richard, the little Richard, who's 16, gets a job in a brickyard, something like a quarry, I suppose. And at that brickyard, Richard, this African-American boy, gets bit by the nasty dog of the owner. So this is what happens. So he goes to the secretary, and the secretary sounds like she might be no older than he, and tellingly she asks to see the bite, and he feels kind of self-conscious about it, asks that the owner come and look at the bite, etc. The owner shows up later, splendid in his white suit, Panama hat. So to ask Richard what happened, and there's a back and forth. And at the end of it, the white owner chuckles and actually says to little Richard, oh, I never knew that a dog bite could hurt. And then he uses the N-word, and then he leaves. So I wanted to be able to kind of read this sort of a chapter with more depth with my students. And this is a sort of thinking that working with Jamie led me to. So I was thinking about, supplementing the typical reading of the chapter with historical material that might give us a better idea about the material conditions of racism, so that with my kids, I wouldn't just be kind of closely reading the text and identifying, bad people who are racist, but reflecting on what the economic structure of that racist mentality might be. So I included a couple of titles there: King Leopold's Ghost, about the Congo, colonial story, or Professor Wailu's book some year, 5-6 years ago. I remember when it came out, it was a very interesting intervention about pain, how pain is a very racialized issue in our country, and how human bodies, how we treat them, etc., have these dimensions. So I would ask my reading these texts, I would then turn to my students and ask them to think about the intimations of the economic reasons for this racism in the book, right? How does the kind of racist structure look at the kid, 16-year-old kid? How does it get to the point where it says, no, you cannot be hurt? And then also to reflect on what sort of economic material benefit racism ends up offering to the racist, something like that. So the short of it is deeper socioeconomic reading, so to speak, that would allow the kids to think about racism from a different perspective, not as an individual issue, but rather maybe kind of a deeper issue. And with my seniors, Jamie, if you could go to the... So this was implicit in what I said. So trying to bring real world issues and current events into the discussion, working with culturally rich materials among the lessons that connect to the CRT competencies. Again, this has to be translated. This has to be gauged right for the age group, of course. With my seniors, one example of a lesson plan that's informed by this sort of thinking is working on a class essay where I asked my students to reflect on a time, a personal essay on a time when they were made self-conscious about, or conscious, self-conscious about their race. And I remember my friend, Miss Martin, kind of helping me kind of think about this sort of a prompt. It was very interesting. One of the most interesting aspects of it was some white kids saying, no, this never happened. I've never thought about race, etc. And which I found to be incredible. So the point is setting up the classroom so that we could ask a kind of demanding question like that and have the kids reflect on themselves, on their lives, and be more self-aware about their situatedness in the world as it is at this point. Once again, I should say, without setting up the context for it, without establishing good communication with students, asking a question like this might not work. People might clam up, not respond. So, I suppose all of us know how to work step by step to bigger projects. Similarly, in the same class, I would ask them to research, do a personal account of immigration, talk about someone in their family. If they did not want to talk about somebody in their family, they could actually politely, I hoped, approach somebody in our community here at the Hun School, among the staff, other teachers, and talk to that person about his or her history of account of immigration, and this would be presented with a kind of more objective study of the history of immigration of that group. So all of these, and this time around, and I will wrap up with this, Jamie, the point of it would, of course, be, among other things, putting the responsibility on the students to tell their stories, bring their voice into projects, also to an extent collaborate with their families and the local community. So I remember, I suppose one of the perks for a teacher, and I'll end with that, I was actually quite interested in their homework. So that is always a plus when we have to do all this work. Thank you all for listening. I hope I'm leaving enough time for you there.
Thank you, Ahmed, so much for your personal story and your journey. I really appreciate that. So just for those that need to go, I understand if you need to go, we are going to go a little over time. Dara is going to just present her story as well, and then we'll be closing the session. So feel free to stick around. If not, thank you for attending. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce Dara. Thank you, Dara. Take it away.
Hi. As Ahmed already mentioned, I know that time is already gone over. So I promise you, as a fellow teacher and your colleague in education, that I will aim to be quick and just share a bit about what CRI looks like in my world. So first, starting off, if you recall from the bio, it was mentioned that I work with our Cultural Competency Committee. So on the slide that you see right here is our mission statement and our purpose. So you'll see that we are a faculty group that is committed to proposing, recommending, and evaluating programs, policies, and services aimed at enhancing diversity and supporting underrepresented groups at the Hun School. What that means, how that looks in practice, is anything from having workshops, participating in book groups, bringing in speakers, but also serving on hiring committees, classroom activities, and creating workshops for students as well as teachers. So that's the broad purpose of our committee. What that means is that we're essentially committed to doing the work of diversity, equity, inclusion inside and outside. When I thought about culturally relevant instruction, we oftentimes think about what that looks like in the classroom, but it really related a lot to the work that I do outside of the classroom. And I have on the slide here our challenge and takeaways. So one could imagine, as we're trying to fulfill the purpose of the committee, you have to work with different constituents of the school. So it's not just with your students, you're working with teachers, colleagues, you're working with parents, you're working with administrators and board members. So what I feel that when I was going through the workshop, it was very helpful to begin to, one, gain vocabulary that was easy enough to help someone who is unfamiliar with a lot of the practices, who isn't kind of engaged in the throes of what we say the work. So when I entered into a conversation, I even actually started with beginning to use some of the vocabulary. So as we began to question, what are we doing? Why are we having certain programming? It was easy to start with saying, hey, this looks like a contributions approach. It's great that we're recognizing and we're celebrating the many voices that are here. However, if we are trying to advance our students to what is fulfilling of our school mission statement, one of which is to prepare our students for an ever-changing global world, we have to do more than just have them recognize and celebrate all the contributions. We want them to, and I begin to go through the stages and say, we want them to take more of a transformative approach. We want them to begin questioning. We want them to begin critically thinking. We want them to begin doing decision making. So that means if it's everything from our programming, it's everything from the classes that we offered, they have to be more than just that. And so that means we have to, what we put when we do our marketing and communications, it can't just focus on certain months, like, oh, it's Black History Month, look what we do. Oh, it's Women History Month. We have to think about how we're showcasing what we do, less than just contributions, but more of than transformative and more of a social action approach. So I feel like it gave me the vocabulary to begin to bring people into the conversation in a way that was easy to understand and in a way that was very comfortable for them to take part in it. If you can go to the next slide, I'll go into a bit of how it looks like in the classroom. Like I teach two sections, one of which is I teach 10th grade, and I teach 2 12th grade electives that are semester long. I actually teach a course that lends itself to culturally responsive instruction because it's called Literature, Ethics, and Social Change. So I put on the slide our overall objectives of the course. So these are students who sign up for it, so they should know this is what you're getting. Hopefully they want it to be there, or maybe this was just the only class that worked in their schedule, but either way, this is what they know that they're going to do. They're going to read, view, listen, discuss everything and anything we do through a social justice lens. So I start them off saying we're going to go through and always get back to this question: what is the right thing to do, and how do we come through that to that answer? We have to look at self, we have to look at others, we have to understand what is our identity, what are other identities out there, and what are the inequalities that arise through those different identities. And so then we get to the social change part. I eventually push them to the point where they would begin thinking about how they challenge, how there are challenging inequalities. I want them to begin to challenge inequalities to bring about change. So that's the ultimate goal of the course. How this is done, I've gotten to do two really great activities that I think showcase a lot of the competencies that Jamie mentioned. One of which is a feature that I love called Hot Topics. I think I took it from a TV show or one of the radio shows that are out there. But essentially what it is that students are put into groups, and every week or every couple of weeks, they are tasked to come up with a hot topic. And that is anything in current events or pop culture that they feel is worthy of discussion, and view it through a social justice lens. Because we are in this hybrid state, I utilize technology. So what would happen is that they first propose a topic. They then found a text for the class to get familiar with the topic. And in this case, the text could be an article, it could be a video. Then the group actually had a discussion, so kind of like a round table. They posted the video, and their classmates viewed the video and then weighed in on the topic. And so I love this because this is an opportunity for students to, yes, talk about and think about the world around them, but they're dealing with real world issues and current events. And they're then critically thinking about them, again, through this social justice lens. But then they're challenging the ideas of each other and really delving into conversation. So you may not be able to see that, but they discussed everything from when the rapper Lil Wayne supported Donald Trump, what that meant, when Kendall Jenner threw a party when we were right in the midst of COVID, to lastly to one of the police shootings. So they talk about everything. And these are students who propose this. So I don't give them any suggestions. These are the things that they want to talk about. And another assignment that I hold near and dear is actually, I call it deconstructing Disney. And it's more of your typical English assignment where they're writing an essay, but this time they're focusing on the question: what do cartoons teach children about people and their place in the world? I cannot take credit for it. It was a modified lesson that I found in this book called Reading, Writing, and Rising Up by Linda Christensen. And I have that posted on the slide, which is an excellent book about social justice in the classroom and gives great activities. But I tweaked it, modified it to fit what I needed the students to do. And they did exactly that. They took their favorite Disney movie and then they picked it apart, looking at all the notions of stereotypical images as it relates to gender, as it relates to heteronormativity, as it relates to racism. And it's not their favorite, because then they realize that their Disney movie that they love near and dear to their heart might not be the most appropriate or slightly problematic. So that's where we are. How this all boils down. Next slide, please. as it relates to the competencies, you have 1, 3, and 5. So everything that we do, from our activities to our conversations in the classroom, I'm challenging students to become more self-aware of their own lens. I don't have them take the implicit bias test, but I think just by just recognizing who's in the room is very important. Knowing what their identities are. We do some work in terms of that. I always like to give them choice and opportunities to take what we're doing in the classroom, outside the classroom, which would be number 3. And again, I already talked about student voice and autonomy, and making sure that they're not just hearing from me, but that they're thinking about these things on their own, and they're having an opportunity to share their learning in the classroom. So that's how CRT looks like in my class, and just having this opportunity to go through the PD gave me more confidence in what I was doing. And also, just to, like I said at the beginning, help me to continue to do what I do and make it more accessible beyond myself. So thank you for your time and for your patience, for sticking around.
Thank you so much, Dara. And I really appreciate you sharing your personal story. It seems like in the chat box, a lot of people love some of your activity ideas and the resources. So thank you. Ahmed, Dara, thank you. I'm just so glad that I got to share my experiences with you, and you with me as well. So thank you. So we are mindful of time. We know we've gone over, and we understand that we want to respect everybody's time. So before we finish up, we just had a few more slides to close off. Put your ideas, strategies, takeaways in the chat box. I just want to share a few resources with you that you could use, some good reading materials. So there's just the sources that I've used if you want to delve deeper into any of those. And here are some resources. That's the book I showed you there, The Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain, and Dream Keepers, which I did see in the box, the chat box. So it sounds like some of you are familiar with Gloria Billings' Dream Keepers. There's a whole bunch there. If you have time, that is. And I would deeply love to say I'm just absolutely honored that I got to share this information with you. I know there was a lot of information. Some people shared in the chat box. There was a lot. And I haven't even covered probably 1/10 of it. So it's an ongoing journey. And if you want more, please write in the chat box. We want more. And what it is that you want specific help in, we would love to provide further support for you. So I think that is all from my end. I just want to say thank you again. Take care and enjoy your culturally responsive journey. Thank you so much. Over to you, Darcy.
All right. Thank you so much, Jamie. Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you, Dara. This has been wonderful. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Again, we're sorry we went over. There's so much to share here. I do want to talk a little bit about our professional learning cohort that we have, that Jamie leads. It is a 3-month professional learning cohort. It provides ongoing professional growth through webinars and small group discussion, practice through classroom application, as you saw today, and also reflection. And we would love it if you would join us. We are starting sessions starting next week. We're actually starting a new cohort. And what that includes are 4 online sessions with Jamie and our education consultants. You'll also have access to our Britannica launch pack. So Jamie talked a little bit about that before. It is 6 hours of CEUs, and you, throughout the cohort, build and develop educator competencies, in culturally responsive instruction. And you saw just a peek at those competencies today, but Jamie really dives into these quite a bit in the cohort. So to give you a little bit of information about how to join, you can join our March 10th start date with this bit.ly here, and the discount code for a buy one, get one free for all of you here that are joining the EdWeb webinar. We are extending that to you. So our discount code is March cohort, and then our April 7th start date, the bit.ly is there as well. And this discount code is April cohort. And we'll make sure that we put those URLs in the chat box so that you can access those. But what I'd like to do while we are Oh, thank you so much for doing that for us. And I just want to make sure that everybody has time for questions and answers. Those of you who are still able to stay with us, and it looks like a lot of you have. So I'm going to pull up some of the questions as we go through, and I'll see if we can direct them to our presenters. This is a really great question, and any of you could answer this, but what is the difference between anti-racist teaching and culturally responsive teaching?
So anti-racist, Darcy, that was the first term you used?
Mm-hmm,
So
it was.
yeah, so just from the research that I've done and my own personal understanding, I think when we talk about anti-racist teaching, we're looking at race and race alone and equity and how we can be inclusive. And with culturally responsive, Darcy, is that what you said, the second, culturally responsiveness?
Mm-hmm.
It does include equity and looks at race and all of the inequities, and we're looking at justice, social justice, transformative lens. But something that is different, and that added component, is that we're actually looking to accelerate student learning and provide rigor. So we're looking at, like Zaretta Hammond talks a lot about cultural responsive teaching in our curriculum. We're really looking at that cognitive development and triggering the brain to think on a higher level and to get them to think very critically about other cultures, other perspectives, and how do we look at multimedia and text and primary resources and look at things from a curious inquiry type of lens. So it goes that step further. I hope that answers the question. We could talk for days on this, but I hope that gives you some kind of a summary there.
All right, thank you, Jamie. And this question is for Ahmed and Dara. If they're asking, someone's asking if your school district or your school was open to teachers being able to incorporate culturally responsive topics into your curriculum. Is that something that your district or your school supports?
Yes, they do support it. We both happen to work at the same school, so it's not a district, so it's an independent school. And keep in mind, remember, I think both of our bios mentioned the Cultural Competency Committee. So first and foremost, we have that committee, which aligns with who we are as a school and what our mission statement is. And then by way of that, our school signed us up for this program. So that there in itself is an illustration of their commitment to having classrooms where teachers feel comfortable with cultural relevant practices.
All right, thank you.
If I could just add, I think that's an important piece for, as teachers, you do want to make sure you have a big impact in your own classroom, but it also, you want to have a school that confirms what you do. So I think it's important to have your administrators understand what cultural relevant pedagogy looks like, because it should not just be in your one classroom. I think it's just coincidental you have two English teachers who both teach 12th grade at the same school. So that is just happenstance, but it's not just in our classrooms. You can find it in more than one. And if not, we're working towards that. We're committed to working to seeing that.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, another question that came in the queue here is, how can we bring this type of committee to our school? So maybe you can talk about how that was initiated or started.
Really, Dara should speak to this again. She's been one of our leaders here at the school. It was in response to the events in the world, really, and I think there was a certain institutional responsiveness at the moment, and I think we've had enough kind of number of colleagues who were capable of responding to that moment and creating structures internally that would make it possible. Of course, we are an independent school, a small school. We are a little more nimble. I cannot really speak to the conditions under which people would approach these issues. But this moment is really ripe to have these conversations.
Yeah, Ahmed already covered a lot of it. I'd also like to add, before I came to work at Hun, I worked in the public school system in Atlanta, Georgia. So even just being familiar with the way how to navigate the public school world, whether it's independent or public school, I think one, just having awareness of what the programs that are out there and getting the right email link or the right flyer on the right desk, and being an advocate for the importance of the work. The summer definitely helped in a sense of committees like the one that I'm a part of, making it our work more urgent. But we had been doing it for years. It just people became more aware of it, and there was an urgency behind it, and so that provided increased support. But if we're already doing it, so I think that was something that we can't take away from that sense. But I think it's just staying in touch of what's happening, so that way when you want to do something and you want to bring the attention and feel the need for it, that again, like I said, it's the sending the right email to the right person to just get your faculty at your school involved in what's happening.
Great, thank you.
And I just wanted to add one other point. Just some schools that I've come across have done things like book studies or solution circles, where they actually start just with a small group of teachers that are passionate about this and making change in their schools. And just starting off with that alone could be very impactful. And from there on, you can just build on some of the things I mentioned earlier about awareness and filling in before you fill in the gaps, but identifying some of the gaps that you have in the curriculum. So maybe it's across a particular faculty area or subject area. Maybe you want to start with middle school or just one grade and do that as a pilot and just see how that goes. And then do follow-up, look at the data, look at student engagement levels and just see what the outcomes are. You will notice some changes, and even getting feedback from students about what they're noticing and how they feel that these changes are impacting them. Thanks, Darcy.
Yeah, thank you. Another question here, and this could be for any of you, it's how do you reconcile your curriculum with, for example, the science of standards of learning that only include tests for Western European or white historical figures and accomplishments? So how do you adjust to the expectations of perhaps what your learning standards are, and then also what is being tested? Or account for that.
Ahmed or Dara, do you have any challenges that that might not be in science, but just how you address that?
If I understood the question correctly, so again, I feel like I have a great deal of autonomy in deciding my curriculum, and actually this conversation, these sessions also helped kind of further my thinking about how to approach my curriculum there. And I, also have, just coincidentally, as friends, we have these conversations about this text, this writer, that writer. So I teach a senior seminar titled Global Literature, and so that invites ongoing reflection on these questions, what to include, and unfortunately, what to exclude. So from my perspective, I'm learning myself, I'm reading, including new things. My big problem is just time and having enough bandwidth myself and my students to do as much as we would want to do. But those reflections have become all the more timely, of course.
Okay, thank you. It looks like we really do need to end this, sadly. We probably have time for one more question, then we need to wrap it up. So if there's any other questions, Darcy?
Sure. I think let's take a look at what another question would be that we haven't answered so far. This is an easy one. Are launch packs available to everyone? Please let us know. Launch packs, I put a link in the chat box, but you can find our launch packs at britannicalearn.com, and there is a fee for them. We do have different subscription models, so please contact us and we'd be happy to share some more information about them. And thank you so much for joining, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks, Dara, Ahmed, and Darcy. And thanks, everybody. Enjoy your day.